Packaged in Google Analytics 4 out of the box, there are some predictive metrics that you may be able to use. And I say you may be able to use because there are some prerequisites for this to work. So now Google is doing lots of machine learning all over the place in Google Analytics, but one of those or a few of those models are focused around predicting user behavior. So there's a couple of predictive metrics that we can look at inside of Google Analytics. Let's first take a look at what they are, and then we'll have a look at some of the prerequisites and the requirements to enable them. So there's three at the time of recording. There's the purchase probability. That's the chance or the probability that someone's going to purchase in the next 7 days that was active on the website or the app in the last 28 days. We've got churn probability. So that's looking at our active users over the last 7 days and looking at those users that will churn in the next 7 days, i.e. not be active, not revisit the website or app. And the predictive revenue, looking at the revenue expected from all users from the last 28 days in the next 28 days. So there's a lot going on there, but I'll link off to the documentation so you can read through it in your own time. But let's have a look at some of those prerequisites. So the first one might sound a bit obvious, but for the purchase probability and the predicted revenue, we need to make sure, we need to be tracking purchases. So we need to be looking at e-commerce websites and apps. Whether that's a purchase event or an in-app purchase event, it doesn't matter, it accounts for both. But we need to be measuring or tracking purchases and revenue for both of these to work. Now, not just for the e-commerce side, but for all of the predictive metrics, we need to make sure that there's enough volume of data for the machine learning model to learn and to be effective at its predictions. So in this case, we need to look at having a certain level of, volume of data or users. In this case, it needs about 1,000 positive and 1,000 negative of each. So in the case of the purchase probability, we need 1,000 purchasers and 1,000 non-purchasers over a 7-day or 28-day period, depending on what metric we're looking at. And that needs to be sustained over a number of periods so that the model can train, learn, and start providing that data to you. So there's lots going on there, but what I'm trying to say, I suppose the underlying point of all this is that if you're e-commerce and you sell stuff and you're tracking revenue and you've got a lot of data coming into Google Analytics or a sufficient amount of data that's relatively well sustained, then we should have the opportunity to use these predictive metrics. Now, if you're not e-commerce or not hitting these thresholds just yet, don't worry. Hopefully over time, Google can reduce those thresholds maybe, and hopefully, fingers crossed, even open up some of these predictive models to some non-e-commerce data. So hopefully over time then we have some good news about that. But for now, it's just these three metrics, just focusing on the e-commerce data, and the prerequisites or the requirements of data volumes are quite high. So if you think you might meet those requirements, an easy way to check to see if we can use these is to go into the segment or audience screen. Because when we go build a new segment or audience, so if I open up an exploration, for example, and click to add a new segment, there's a bunch of suggested segments, just like there is suggested audiences at the bottom of the screen. And now part of that is the predictive section, and they tell you on each one of these whether or not you're eligible to use each one. So I'm looking at the Google Merchandise Store right now. That's an e-commerce website that apparently does have the required or sufficient volumes of data for these models to work. And it says that each of these predictive models each of these predictive segments are ready to use. So for example, if I look at the likely 7-day purchases and I click through there, it automatically generates me a segment of the most likely users or users that are most likely to make a purchase in the next 7 days. Now, it's accounting for both app and website, so that's the purchase event and in-app purchase event. I'm just going to remove the in-app purchase one because that's not relevant for this website. But now we're saying this is where we're looking at the purchase probability is above the 90th percentile. And now I can tweak that, I can customize that. By clicking through that is above the 90th percentile, it opens up this second tab where I can go in and change or configure that prediction. So first of all, if I want to look at the top 10% of users that are most likely to convert, I can click there, the pre-selected icon on the left. I can even look at the least likely users that are going to be to purchase. Or I can pick something completely in the middle. I can actually use these sliders and drag around those sliders to pick a different percentile entirely if I'd like to. But if I want to keep it into the top 10% of users for simplicity, it gives me a real-time update underneath of the number of users that are likely to convert and the purchase probability at the top. If I'm happy with that, I can just click out of that screen and then I can apply this as a segment, and I can use this throughout all my explorations. I can even use this in my audience builder as well, either publishing it to an audience from here, or I can just build it as an audience straight away. Either way, I can click apply and I can add that to any report or any exploration that I'm building within the Explore workspace. And you can see here that I've just built a simple freeform table visualization, and I've got my all users segment looking at my sessions and session duration. And right next to it, I've got my likely 7-day purchaser sessions and session duration. I find this really fascinating because Google Analytics 4 is now starting on that process of being able to not just categorize users based on actions they've performed, but actions they're likely to perform in the future or have yet to perform. Where I find this exciting is how we can use this within the reports, but also within things like Google Ads, the connected ad platforms. Because I can build audiences now of users that are most likely to purchase in the next couple of days. And so I can use that in Google Ads to target a specific campaign to if I'd like. Another way I can think about using this is creating audiences of users that are likely to convert, or maybe my top spenders in the next couple of days. And I can use an audience triggered event and put that into their user timeline off the back of the audience creation screen. And then I can mark that as a conversion, and I can even bid to that in Google Ads if I would like to. So what I'm now doing is I can think about using the predictive metrics outside of Google Analytics, but also inside of Google Analytics through things like segments and audiences, but how I can use that in my advertising too. So I can run campaigns directly targeting users that are likely to churn or purchase or not purchase, but also I can optimize my campaigns not to maybe a purchase itself, but to a potential purchase. Now this is just the start of where Google Analytics 4 is going with this predictive modeling world. I'm really excited to see where they take it. Fingers crossed over time they can open this up to non-e-commerce related data. And also maybe they can reduce some of the barriers of entry, some of those thresholds or the prerequisites needed. So some of the smaller volumed websites or conversions can make use of this too. I'm really excited to see where they take this, and I'm also really excited to see where everyone else takes this from a marketing and reporting perspective too.